Thanks. This room, as most of you know, is usually a library. And this book was born in this room exactly 5 years ago. So imagine for a second what a thrill it is for me to come back to this room, to take this 5-year-old book and send it out into the world. I'm immensely grateful to be able to do that. I'm immensely grateful to the Mass Historical Society, not only for the amazing resources, that goes without saying, but for the amazing people. As I say in the acknowledgments of my book, this is a place, the Massachusetts Historical Society, where uncommon generosity is a common virtue, and I am immensely grateful to the staff of the Adams Papers and the Massachusetts Historical Society, and in particular, Conrad Wright, the research director, and especially in particular Maggie Hogan, who without whom there's no way I could have possibly written the book. If you find any mistakes in the book, Maggie will be available after the talk. One of the fun questions that everybody writing a biography of Abigail Adams gets to and has to confront is, how was she and how are other women affected by the American Revolution? Many of you know that John Adams was gone for most of that decade that overlapped the American Revolution from 1774 to 1784. And during that decade, he put Abigail in charge, not only of his farm down in Braintree and later Quincy, Massachusetts, but in charge of the finances too. And I was happy to discover in this room 5 years ago, while working on my previous book, that Abigail Adams ran the Adams family finances much better than her husband ever had. She had a saying that we still have a version of today: nothing venture, nothing have, which kind of scared John, because he was conservative not only politically, but in his temperament and his finances too. And she scared him with some of what she did, but in the process, she made him a rich man. I'm a good person to talk about this too, because I'm from Virginia, and you know that his successors as president, Thomas Jefferson, the sage of Monticello, and James Madison of Montpelier, when they died so deep in debt that those two beautiful plantations had to be sold to pay their debts. Not so John Adams. And of course, he had a lot to do with that, with his legal career, but that ended 50 years before his death. Yeah, he made some money as a public official, not as much, he said, as he could have as a lawyer, but I think if the Adams financial records survived as well as the Adams correspondence did, we would see pretty good evidence that Abigail had at least as much to do with the family's wealth as he did. I had a pet theory early on in this project that maybe her success as a financial manager would leave a visible trace in the written record. I'm, like many of you, interested in all these statements she made in favor of women's rights. You know, she made them not only to her husband John. You all know the Remember the Ladies letter, and you've got an excerpt from it there. But she wrote her nieces talking about women's education and advocating that, to lots of other men besides her husband. So the pet theory was, maybe if we take this early statement in favor of women's rights, the Remember the Ladies letter from 1776, and compare it to what she wrote at the end of the war, we'd see her more fired up, more confident, and making stronger demands. So I want to tell you the fate of that pet theory of mine, but first let me tell you some of the details. How did she do so well financially? The first of the three ways that she did so during the Revolutionary War was this. Anytime somebody's overseas, whether you're a Mexican family and the husband is in, or the wife is in the United States, it's traditional to send some of that money home, right? John, when he was over in France as an American diplomat, sent some of the money home. He wanted to do it by just having Abigail draw a bill of exchange on him, similar to a modern bank check. And Abigail said, that'd be okay, you're the husband, we'll do that if you want, but I have a better idea. And that is, there's a war on. European goods are going at very high prices here in Massachusetts. So instead of sending me, take that cash and use it to buy a chest of goods and ship it over to me. Now, we've known about this for a long time, but we haven't known the extent of it because John always referred to these shipments as goods for family use, as a present that I thought I would send you. But if you go to the Adams Family Correspondence, there is an illustration of one of the inventories of goods being sent over, the shipping list, and 87% by value of the goods being sent are not presents. It's bulk items that are obviously intended for resale. Now, that's one of the mysteries that I have to admit I still haven't solved. Why did he refer to these as for family use? Was it not respectable for the wife of a diplomat to be in trade? That's possible. There were lots of women in Boston who were merchants. If we get time in Q&A, I'll tell you about a women's merchants coffee riot that Abigail reported on in 1777. Maybe because it wasn't respectable, or maybe, and this is the theory I went with in the book, when a ship was captured by the enemy, it was traditional to let the crew and the passengers keep their personal items. And so maybe the reason John referred to these as for family use was that maybe if they were captured, they wouldn't be seized. I'm not sure. But the reality is that one of the early shipments that John sent Abigail was captured. And he wrote his wife saying, "Burn my fingers, don't want to meddle in this anymore." But Abigail wrote John back saying, "Look, it's true this is a dangerous business, but the very process that makes it dangerous," this is ruled Britannia. Britannia did rule the waves. The British warships pretty much controlled the Atlantic. But the few ships that can run the blockade and get through to Boston, the people with goods on those ships can name their own price. To quote her, she said, "If 1 in 3 arrives, I should be a gainer," which I take as the 18th century version of, "You just don't get it, do you, John?" But eventually he did get it, and he continued his shipments. And these shipments had some fascinating influences on the relationship between this husband and this wife. They had been debating for some time, and maybe there are couples in this room who've had this debate, whether to buy a new vehicle. Yeah, okay, some of you have. He wanted to wait. He was a good, frugal Yankee New Englander. She said, "It's so shabby, the old one. We got to get a new chaise." And the prices, of course, were up for these things, even though they're made in Massachusetts. The war, "Don't you know there's a war on?" as she was saying to her own clients, was being said to her. Well, he sent her a shipment in 1780 of Barcelona handkerchiefs. Handkerchiefs were a women's item mostly then. You wear them in your hair and so forth. And they happened to hit right in the middle of a terrible shortage of that particular item when they were at high fashion. She sold them for enough money to buy the chaise. And what could John say? She'd bought it with her own money. In that same year, 1780, John Adams had an idea. Still in Paris, he says to Abigail, maybe having had some of our shipments seized, what I should do is instead of putting them in these big chests and shipping them across the Atlantic, I'll disperse them and ask everybody who goes from France to Massachusetts to take a little thing for you. That way we're spreading the risk. And he sent the first shipment, a present, he called it, with the Marquis de Lafayette. You may know that the great French hero of the Revolutionary War, Lafayette, went home every winter. The army's not fighting. No reason to stick around here. So he went home, and so when he came back in the spring of 1780, he brought some stuff for Abigail to sell. And once again, Abigail wrote her husband saying, "Your will is law to me. If that's the way you want to do it, that's what we'll do. But if you want to disperse your shipments like that, you're going to have to buy the items to send me retail. And you gotta buy wholesale," she said. And she convinced him. And the remaining shipments came wholesale. And in fact, pretty soon they got it rigged to where John wasn't involved in the process at all. She wrote straight to the Amsterdam and Paris and Barcelona and Bilbao merchants, and they sent the goods directly to her. And she did quite well. Another source of income of hers, and I hesitate to use that phrase because it was a long-term investment that didn't pay off during the war, was Vermont. By the time of the Revolutionary War, The Indians had been driven out of Vermont, but it had not been very thickly settled by Europeans coming up from other colonies.